Howdy, howdy. Sue Double here. I've been trying to get to some testing since the Grim in the Grave DLC came down and compare it to some of the old testing, and it looks like CA may have tinkered a little bit with the Ironbreaker, and the result is they're performing significantly better in combat. I'll show you some of the testing and explain what I think they did. So I ran some testing against Black Orcs, the Chosen, and Great Swords, and did a few other playing around. But here's the testing I just did, and here's the testing I had originally done. Now it's not quite perfect because I'd used a bigger unit size in this first set of testing, but it's pretty reasonable. Anyways, in the test I just completed, the kill ratio was 1.18 to 1, and the Ironbreakers won all 5 of the battles. And that's not taking advantage of their charge defense or their satchel charges. It's just a straight up fight comparing their stats. So in the old one, the Ironbreakers only won 2 out of the 5, and their kill ratio was 0.92. So it appears that it has gone up. Now, what I think has been done, and I went and looked really closely at the videos, and the one thing I talked about was the melee animation for the Ironbreakers was poor because it flipped them into their stagger animation really frequently, and they couldn't recover from it. And sometimes they would get hit 2, 3, 4, 5 times in a row, and I think I counted as many as 9 in one. And I was really searching for that when I was looking, and sometimes they would get staggered twice in a row, but pretty rarely. It looks like they may have increased the threshold for flipping them into their stagger animation. Their stagger animation has not changed. It's exactly the same. It's just a lot harder to flip them into it, and the results are they're a lot more robust against other units. Now, has that fixed them all the way? I don't think so, and I will go over why I think that now. So one of the other issues with the Ironbreaker is simply that of stats. Now, they have the highest melee defense in the game at 68, and I've gone through this in my first combat analysis video, but basically the way melee works to see if you hit is you add 40% to your melee attack, and you subtract the melee defense of the unit that you're attacking. So in this case, we'd add 40 to 30, and we'd get 70, and subtract 68, and technically we'd have a 2% chance to hit. So these guys, if Ironbreakers are fighting Ironbreakers, they'd have a 2% chance to hit. But the game is capped, hard capped, so that you cannot have below a 10% chance to hit. So what happens is you give up stats right off the bat against most units. Now, an easy way to go and check this is if you grab a Slayer. They have 38 melee attack. So basically the way to understand it is you take the melee defense, subtract 30, and that gives you 38. Anything with below 38 melee attack is actually gaining stats for free, because they can't have a less than 10% chance to hit. So say, for example, a zombie has a 5% chance to hit right out of the gate. They're going to go up to a 10% chance to hit against anything they fight. That's just how the stats work. But for the Ironbreakers, because their melee defense is higher, literally higher than anything else, higher than any Lord, unless I missed one, I think the next closest is the Chosen with 62, and they should actually be given the same treatment I'm going to suggest as well later in this video to fix that problem. But how we can do this is, we know anything with less than 38 melee attack is getting free stat points when they fight an Ironbreaker. So melee attack on this Slayer happens to be 38. So if we go look at other units, say we go and look at these Chosen, we can see down here, and you see their melee attack. If this is a negative, that is the amount of stat points you give up, because it's comparing to the melee attack of the Slayer. So in this case, you can see their melee attack is 48 or 46. They got +8. That means they're not giving up the Ironbreakers are not giving up any stat points when they fight Chosen. This is one of the rare occasions. But when we look at any other units, and actually Chaos is not the greatest, but you can see right out of the gate against Chaos Marauders, they get 4 free stat points against the Ironbreakers. These guys get 6 free stat points. Forsaken get 4 free stat points. Chaos Warriors get 4. The Great Weapon version gets 6. The Halberds get 8. And on and on. And if we look at a faction like Vampire Counts, they get a massive amount. Now the zombies, their zombies are a very special unit, and I'm not really worried. But if we go and look at the Skeleton Warriors, their melee attack is 18. So basically, right out of the gate, they get 20 free stat points against the Ironbreakers. We go up to the Crypt Ghouls, they get 11 free stat points, just by design. The Konigstein Stalkers, 11. The Crypt Ghouls here, just 1, but it's still 1. The Graveguard, 16. Karen Wraiths, which is really big, they get 20 free stat points when they fight against the Ironbreakers. The Graveguard with great weapons, they get 16 free stat points, and that's pretty huge, because you think the Graveguard with armor piercing can do a lot of damage. So 16 free stat points right out of the gate is massive. And if you want to see how big that is, you can go look at my first video comparing stats and melee attack and melee defense, and you can see how big that is. And if you look, just in the game, the actual campaign, going from normal difficulty to hard difficulty basically gives the computer 10 extra stat points, and it makes a massive difference on the battlefield. And we're talking not 10 but 16 by design against a unit that's going to be already pretty good against the Ironbreakers because they have that armor piercing trait. So what do we do about this? And you go to any faction. I mean, really, the Empire is it hurts to look at this. 14 free stat points, 9. We go to these great swords, they get 8 free stat points against the Ironbreaker. So how could you fix this? What would be a good solution? Well, first of all, I mean, I would argue that, as I did in the very first video, is you need to give the Ironbreaker a silver shield. Their shield covers up 75% of their body just because it's so big and they're so small. I think that's something that would not unbalance anything, would make a lot of sense. But when we talk about these in terms of how they operate in game, what you could do is simply reduce the Ironbreaker's melee defense by 15 points. Make it 53. And then give them a 15% ward save against physical damage. So basically 15% physical resistance. You would get the very same initial breakdown, basically compared to all units, because you're reducing their melee defense by 15 points. That's 15%, and you're increasing their physical resistance by 15%. And what that would do, it would make the Ironbreakers feel much stronger against a lot more units. And that's actually one of the reasons why, by the way, Longbeards are such a great unit, is because their stat points, and I've said this in one of my Essential Units videos, they're kind of in a sweet spot at 47 melee defense, minus 30, that's 17. Anything with 17 or more melee attack, they're going to get to use all their melee defense. So they tend to be a really good unit. So simple. Reduce this to 53 melee defense and give them a 15% physical damage resistance. It works against missiles along with their shields. They will feel much more tanky. And for dwarf lovers, I mean, it'll be much funner unit to play. And I think you should actually do the same thing with the Chosen. And I don't know if there's any other units that are in that same boat. I haven't looked at them all, but they have 62 melee defense, so they're giving up a lot. Simple. Change it to 52 melee defense and give these Chosen a 10% resistance against physical damage. It will make them feel a lot more tanky and, a lot more what you would think they would feel about. Now, there's other balance considerations, and as I've said, I will make a balanced video. And basically, by design, the dwarves as a whole and the Ironbreakers at a maximum really suffer from some of the game design, which I don't think is bad. I think the game is designed so that as the combat lingers on, it scales more towards damage and less towards defense, so that the battle can resolve faster as you get to the end. And I think that's good game design. But the dwarfs suffer from this the most, and the most dwarfy dwarf of all are the Ironbreakers, and they suffer from them. So simple solution. I think flipping their melee, what they've done is, I think they've done, because I mean, I've only spent about 45 minutes going through the melee animations and the stagger animation, but it does not appear that they're staggering as often. So it looks like they've gone in and increased the threshold to flip them into their stagger animation, which has definitely had an impact on how well they perform. So anyone who wants to use Ironbreakers, they're definitely not going to be as cost prohibitive, because you're going to get a better performance out of them in the game. But I still think they are underperforming, and by design. 68 melee defense sounds awesome, but if you're only using 50 of that, or 45, and right off the bat against almost any unit you fight, you're giving them free stat points for nothing, it just doesn't seem to make sense. So that's my fix. Continue to fix the Ironbreakers, give them a silver shield, take their melee defense down from 68 to 53, and give them 15% physical damage resistance. And do the same with the Chaos Warriors, or the Chosen. Take them from 62 to 52 and give them 10%. And those units will feel like they should feel. Anyways, hope you found that interesting, and I'll see you soon.